My name is Sarah Michelle Parker, and I'm 32 years old. I thought I knew what betrayal felt like until Thanksgiving 2024, when my own father looked me straight in the eyes across our family dinner table and called me a leech. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Around us, the perfect Norman Rockwell scene continued: golden turkey, cranberry sauce glistening in my grandmother's crystal bowl, my stepmother Linda's carefully arranged autumn centerpiece. But everything felt like it was happening underwater as my father's voice cut through the warm family chatter. Sarah, you're 32 years old. You're a leech. You can't stay in the guest house after November. The expenses are too much. My fork clattered against the china plate. My younger half-brother Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while my stepsister Emma smirked behind her wine glass. Linda just stared at her plate, saying nothing. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Dad, I pay rent, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I've been paying you $1,500 a month for the guest house for 3 years. That doesn't even cover utilities, he snapped, cutting into his turkey with aggressive precision. You're bleeding us dry. It's time you learn to stand on your own feet. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a successful marketing manager at a tech company, sitting in the guest house I'd been paying for while watching my 25-year-old stepbrother Jake, who hadn't held a job longer than 6 months, receive zero criticism for living rent-free in the main house's basement. But what happened next changed everything. What I discovered the following morning would reveal a betrayal so deep, so calculated, that it would force me to question everything I thought I knew about family, love, and my own worth. If you've ever felt like the black sheep in your own family, hit that subscribe button because this story is about to get wild. And trust me, you won't believe what I found out about where that rent money was really going. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my small but cozy guest house, the place I'd called home for 3 years, and made a decision that would change my life forever. By morning, I packed everything I owned, canceled every single payment and subscription tied to my father's address, and prepared to disappear from their lives completely. I'd been the family's financial safety net for years without realizing it. Car insurance for Jake's BMW? I'd been covering it. The premium cable package Linda insisted they needed? My money. Even the monthly lawn service that kept their pristine yard looking magazine perfect came out of what I thought was just my rent. As I loaded my Honda Civic with boxes at 6 a.m., something felt almost liberating about leaving. The early morning air was crisp, and for the first time in months, I could breathe freely. I'd found a month-to-month rental apartment across town, nothing fancy, but it would be mine. Truly mine. I was securing the last box in my trunk when I heard the familiar rumble of my father's Mercedes pulling into the driveway. My stomach clenched. It was barely 7 in the morning. What was he doing up this early? The car door slammed with enough force to wake the neighbors. I turned to see my father marching toward me, his face red with rage, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled button-down shirt. Behind him, Linda hovered near their front door in her silk robe, her face pale with what looked like panic. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the quiet suburban street. I straightened my shoulders and met his gaze. "Exactly what you asked me to do, Dad. I'm leaving." "You can't just leave. You have responsibilities here. Commitments." The word commitments made something snap inside me. After 32 years of trying to earn his approval, of being the reliable daughter who never caused trouble, of watching him shower attention and money on his new family while treating me like an obligation, I was done. "What commitments?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "You made it very clear yesterday that I'm not welcome here." "I didn't mean," he started, then stopped, running his hands through his graying hair. "Sarah, you can't just cut everything off. The insurance, the utilities, the what, Dad?" I interrupted, something cold settling in my chest. "What exactly are you worried about me cutting off?" That's when I saw it, the flash of panic in his eyes. The same look I'd seen on Linda's face moments earlier. And in that split second, I realized that my Thanksgiving eviction hadn't been about tough love or teaching me independence. It had been about money. My money. Money they'd been using for far more than just utilities. But what I discovered next would make that revelation look like child's play. Because sometimes the people who hurt you the most aren't strangers, they're the ones who raised you to trust them completely. To understand how devastating that morning was, you need to know how I got there. You need to understand the intricate web of manipulation that had been woven around my life for years, so carefully that I never even noticed the threads. My parents divorced when I was 8 years old. It wasn't a bitter split, at least, not on the surface. Dad got remarried to Linda within 2 years, inheriting her teenage daughter Emma and eventually having Jake together. I spent weekends and holidays with them, but mostly lived with my mom in her small apartment across town. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. While other kids were getting into trouble, I was getting straight A's and working part-time jobs to save for college. Dad would often praise me for being mature for my age and so much more responsible than other kids. At the time, I thought it was a compliment. When I was 25 and landed my first real marketing job, Dad suggested I move into their guest house. "It'll help you save money," he said, "and we'd love having you closer." The rent seemed fair, $1,500 a month for a furnished space with my own entrance. Mom thought it was a great opportunity to build a relationship with my father's new family. What I didn't realize was that I was becoming their secret financial backbone. It started small. "Sarah, could you grab the groceries this week? I'll pay you back." But he never did. The cable company can only install if someone's home during the day. "Mind if we put it under your name?" Before I knew it, my credit was tied to services for a house I didn't own, for a family that saw me as convenient rather than cherished. The pattern became clear when I looked back. Every family gathering where Dad praised my financial responsibility came right before a new request. Every time Linda complimented my maturity was followed by asking me to co-sign something for Jake or cover a family expense just this once. I remember the exact moment I should have seen through it all. It was Jake's 23rd birthday party, 2 years ago. The whole extended family was there, aunts, uncles, grandparents. Dad stood up to give a toast, and his words still echo in my mind. "To Jake," he said, raising his glass high, "my son, who reminds me every day what unconditional love looks like. And to Emma, my beautiful daughter who lights up every room she enters." Then, almost as an afterthought, and to Sarah, who's always been so independent and capable. Independent and capable. Code words for we don't need to worry about her because she takes care of herself. While Jake got unconditional love and Emma got to be beautiful, I got to be useful. That night, after everyone left, I helped Linda clean up. As we loaded the dishwasher, she made a comment that should have been my wake-up call. "You know, Sarah, you're so lucky to be self-sufficient. I worry constantly about Jake and Emma, but with you, I never have to think twice. You've got everything handled." She meant it as a compliment, I think. But what I heard was, "We don't think about you unless we need something." The financial manipulation had become so normalized that I didn't question it when Dad asked me to take over the car insurance for the family plan to get a better rate. I didn't hesitate when Linda suggested I pay for Jake's community college classes because you understand the value of education. I even helped cover Emma's wedding expenses last year, contributing $5,000 because family helps family. But Emma's wedding was where I first glimpsed the truth. As I watched my father walk her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, as I heard his heartfelt speech about raising this beautiful girl as his own, I realized something that made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. He had never looked at me that way. In 30 years, he had never once spoken about me with that kind of pride, that kind of pure, uncomplicated love. After the ceremony, I overheard Linda talking to her sister about the wedding costs. "We're so grateful for Sarah's contribution," she said. "It really saved us from having to dip into Jake's college fund." Jake's college fund. The son who dropped out twice and changed majors 4 times had a protected college fund, while I, the daughter who'd paid her own way through school with loans I was still paying off, was expected to contribute to his sister's wedding. That conversation planted a seed of doubt that grew slowly over the following months. I started paying closer attention to the family dynamics, to the way money flowed in their household. I noticed that Jake never seemed to lack for anything: new clothes, expensive gadgets, nights out with friends. Emma's apartment was furnished with pieces that looked suspiciously like they'd come from high-end stores. Meanwhile, I was living in their guest house, paying rent, covering utilities, and somehow always being asked to contribute more. The breaking point came 3 months before that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. Linda casually mentioned that they were considering renovating the kitchen and asked if I'd be interested in investing in the improvements since I lived there too. When I hesitated, Dad jumped in with his trademark guilt trip. "Sarah, we're not asking you to pay for the whole thing. We just thought, since you benefit from living here, you might want to have some input in the design. It's an investment in the property. An investment in a property I would never own. In improvements that would increase the value of their home while I remained a tenant with no equity, no security, no real place in their family structure." I started keeping track after that. Every expense they asked me to cover, every favor that somehow never got repaid, every time my contributions were minimized while Jake and Emma's needs were prioritized. The numbers were staggering. But even then, even with the evidence right in front of me, I couldn't quite believe that my own father would systematically exploit me. I told myself it was just poor communication, that they didn't realize how much they were asking of me. Until that Thanksgiving dinner. Until he called me a leech while sitting at a table paid for with money I'd contributed, eating food I'd helped buy, in a house where utilities I'd been covering kept the lights on. The word leech wasn't just an insult. It was projection. And the next morning, when he showed up screaming at my door, I was about to discover just how deep his deception really went. Because what I found in his desperate panic wasn't just about the money I was cutting off. It was about the money he'd been taking that I didn't even know about. The desperation in my father's voice that morning was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. This wasn't the controlled, measured tone he used in his real estate business or the warm, paternal voice he saved for Jake and Emma. This was raw panic, and it made my skin crawl. "Sarah, you have to listen to me," he said, following me as I locked the guest house door for the final time. "You can't just disappear. There are legal obligations here." Legal obligations. The phrase stopped me cold. "What legal obligations, Dad?" "I paid my rent month to month. There's no lease." That's when Linda appeared beside him, her face drawn and tired. She looked like she'd been up all night crying. "Sarah, please. Can we just talk? Inside? Away from the neighbors?" Something in her tone made me pause. This wasn't the composed, slightly condescending Linda I'd grown up with. This was a woman who looked genuinely afraid. Against my better judgment, I followed them into the main house. The same house where, 18 hours earlier, I'd been called a leech across the Thanksgiving dinner table. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat in their pristine living room, a room I'd helped furnish with my contributions over the years. Dad paced behind the couch while Linda perched on the edge of her chair, twisting her wedding ring nervously. The silence stretched until I couldn't stand it anymore. Okay, what's this really about? And don't tell me it's about utilities. Linda looked at Dad, some silent communication passing between them. When he didn't speak, she took a shaky breath. Sarah, there's something we need to tell you. Something we should have told you years ago. My stomach dropped. What? The guest house isn't the only thing your rent has been covering, she said quietly. We've been using your name for other things too. What kind of other things? Dad finally stopped pacing and turned to face me, his face gray with what I was beginning to recognize as guilt. The mortgage refinance last year. We put you down as a co-signer. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? We needed someone with good credit, Linda rushed to explain. Your name, your credit score. We thought since you lived here. You forged my signature? My voice came out as a whisper. The silence that followed was deafening. Not forged, Dad said weakly. We have power of attorney for emergencies. What? This time I screamed it. When did I give you power of attorney? When you moved in, Linda said, her voice barely audible. It was in the rental agreement. The small print. I felt like I was drowning. 3 years. For 3 years, they'd had legal authority to sign my name to documents, and I'd never even known. The rental agreement I'd signed so trustingly, so grateful to be welcomed into my father's home, had been a trap. What else? I asked, my voice deadly calm. What else have you signed my name to? They exchanged another look, and I knew it was bad. Really bad. The second mortgage, Dad said finally. Jake's car loan. Emma's credit card debt after college. Each revelation hit like a separate punch to the gut. How much? Sarah. How much? About 200,000, Linda whispered. The room spun. $200,000 of debt, all tied to my name, my credit, my financial future. And I'd known nothing about it. You've destroyed my credit, I said, the realization washing over me like ice water. All those times I tried to get a car loan, or looked into buying my own place, and kept getting rejected. We've been making the payments, Dad said quickly. Your credit is fine. Better than fine, actually. All this activity has improved your score. With what money? But even as I asked, I already knew the answer. Your rent, Linda said. And the other contributions you've made over the years. I laughed, but it came out bitter and broken. So I've been paying the debt you put in my name without my knowledge. I've been funding my own financial imprisonment. That's when Jake walked into the room, coffee mug in hand, looking like he'd just rolled out of bed. He took one look at the scene, me crying, Linda wringing her hands, Dad standing there looking guilty, and sighed. Are you finally telling her about the money stuff? The casual way he said it, like this was common knowledge, like I was the only one who'd been kept in the dark, broke something inside me. You knew? I asked. Jake shrugged. I mean, yeah. How do you think we paid for my BMW? Or Emma's apartment deposit? Or Mom's medical bills last year when her insurance didn't cover everything? Each revelation was another weight added to my chest until I could barely breathe. Linda's medical bills, bills I'd thought came from their savings, had been paid with credit taken out in my name. Emma knows too, Jake continued, oblivious to the damage his words were causing. She felt kind of bad about it, actually. But Dad said you were making good money and didn't really need to know the details. Didn't need to know the details. About my own financial obligations. About debt that could ruin my future. I stood up slowly, everything crystallizing in my mind with perfect, painful clarity. This wasn't a family. This was a business arrangement where I was the only one who didn't know I was being used. I'm calling a lawyer, I said quietly. Sarah, please, Dad stepped forward. Your family. We can work this out. We just need. I'm not family, I interrupted, the truth settling over me like a shroud. Family doesn't do this to each other. I'm a resource. I've always been a resource. The look on his face told me I was right. After 32 years, I was finally seeing clearly. You're right about one thing, Dad. I am a leech. I've been bleeding you dry by existing, by wanting to be loved, by accepting crumbs and calling it a relationship. I headed toward the door. But that stops now. Wait! Linda called after me. The payments. If you cut everything off, we'll lose the house. I turned back one last time. Then you should have thought about that before you turned your daughter into your personal ATM. As I walked out of that house for the last time, I could hear Dad shouting behind me, but his words no longer had power over me. The spell was broken. But the hardest part wasn't walking away. The hardest part was realizing that the father who'd raised me, the man I'd spent decades trying to please, had never seen me as his daughter at all. I was about to learn just how far that betrayal extended, and how much strength I didn't know I had. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my own apartment, truly mine, no strings attached, watching the morning sun stream through windows that no one can take away from me. The journey from that devastating Thanksgiving to this moment of peace has been the hardest and most transformative of my life. The first thing I did after leaving Dad's house was exactly what I'd promised. I called a lawyer. What I discovered was even worse than I'd imagined. Not only had they forged my signature on multiple documents over the years, but they'd also been claiming me as a dependent on their taxes while charging me rent. The legal term for what they'd done was identity theft, and it was a felony. My attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chin, looked at the evidence I'd gathered and shook her head in disbelief. Sarah, this is one of the most systematic cases of family financial abuse I've ever seen. They've committed multiple crimes, and you have grounds for both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit. The decision of whether to press charges kept me awake for weeks. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about my father potentially going to jail. But Rebecca helped me see it clearly. This isn't about revenge. It's about accountability. And if you don't stop them, they'll do this to someone else. The confrontation came when they tried to contest the fraud claims I'd filed with the credit agencies. Dad showed up at my new apartment with Jake in tow, both of them acting like I was the one causing problems. Sarah, you're tearing this family apart, Dad said, his voice carrying that familiar manipulative tone. Is money really more important than family? For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. You made it about money when you stole my identity, Dad. You made it about money when you used me for 3 years without my knowledge. I'm just cleaning up the mess you created. Jake stepped forward, and I could see he'd inherited Dad's sense of entitlement. Come on, Sarah. We're family. Can't you just let this go? Let it go? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Jake, do you know how much debt you've racked up in my name? $70,000. Your BMW, your credit cards, your college fund that you never used for college. I've been working my ass off to build a life while unknowingly funding yours. The look on his face told me he'd never considered the real impact of what they'd done. To him, it had just been easy money with no consequences. That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I pressed charges. The legal process was grueling, but it was also liberating. For the first time in my life, someone was holding my father accountable for his actions. The case made local news, local realtor charged with identity theft against own daughter, and the fallout was swift. Dad lost his real estate license. Linda filed for divorce within 2 months. Jake had to sell his BMW and move back into the basement because without my unknowing financial support, they couldn't afford the house payments. Emma cut contact with all of them, apparently having been racked with guilt about the situation for years. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to kick me out and calling me a leech, Dad had destroyed the very financial foundation that had been keeping his world afloat. But the real healing began when I started therapy. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, helped me understand something crucial. What had happened to me wasn't unique. Family financial abuse is more common than people realize, especially among daughters who are seen as responsible and independent. You were groomed, she explained during one session. Not in the way we typically think of grooming, but financially and emotionally. They conditioned you from a young age to see your value through your usefulness, to equate love with financial contribution. That revelation was both devastating and freeing. It meant that the relationship I'd mourned losing had never really existed in the first place. The turning point came during the settlement negotiations. Dad's lawyer proposed that I drop the criminal charges in exchange for them paying off all the debt they'd accumulated in my name and giving me $50,000 for damages. It's a good offer, Rebecca told me. You'd walk away financially whole, and they'd avoid jail time. But as I sat in that conference room, looking at my father across the table, a man who looked like he'd aged 10 years and 6 months, I realized something profound. I didn't want his money anymore. I didn't want anything from him. I'll drop the criminal charges, I said, but I don't want the settlement money. I want something else. Everyone in the room looked surprised. Dad's lawyer raised his eyebrows. What do you want? I want him to attend financial abuse counseling for a year. And I want him to write letters to Jake and Emma explaining what he did and why it was wrong. They need to understand that what happened to me could happen to them. Dad's face crumpled. Sarah, please. I know I made mistakes, but they weren't mistakes, Dad. They were choices. You chose to use me for years. You chose to lie to me. You chose to call me a leech at Thanksgiving while sitting at a table I helped pay for. I stood up, feeling stronger than I ever had in my life. And now I'm choosing to walk away. The final settlement was exactly what I'd asked for. Dad completed his counseling program and wrote the letters to Jake and Emma. Jake eventually apologized and asked if we could rebuild our relationship slowly. He'd been as much a victim of Dad's manipulation as I had been, just in a different way. Emma reached out to thank me for protecting her from a future she hadn't seen coming. Linda's divorce was finalized 4 months later. She sent me a letter apologizing for her part in everything and thanking me for having the courage to expose the truth. She's in therapy now too, working through her own patterns of financial codependency. Today, 6 months after that terrible Thanksgiving, I'm in a better place than I've ever been. My credit score is actually higher now that all the fraudulent debt has been removed. I've been promoted at work. I'm dating someone who loves me for who I am, not what I can provide. But the best part isn't the external changes, it's the internal ones. I've learned to recognize my own worth beyond what I can contribute financially. I've learned that real family doesn't keep score, doesn't manipulate, doesn't take advantage of love and trust. And I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. Last week, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Jake. "Hey sis, I'm getting married next spring. Would you consider coming?" No expectations, no money involved. Just, if you want to be there. For the first time in months, I smiled when I thought about my family. Not the family that used me, but the family we might still become, one built on honesty, respect, and genuine love instead of financial convenience. I texted him back, "I'd like that. Let's talk." Because here's what I've learned, you can't choose the family you're born into, but you can choose the family you keep. And sometimes, the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to prove they've changed. I'm 32 years old, and I'm finally free. Free from financial manipulation, free from conditional love, free from the belief that my worth is measured by my usefulness. The guest house I used to live in is empty now. Dad had to rent it out to strangers to help cover the mortgage. Sometimes I drive by and feel a twinge of sadness, not for what I lost, but for what I never really had. But mostly, I feel grateful. Grateful for the courage to leave, grateful for the strength to stand up for myself, and grateful for the hard-won knowledge that I deserve better. Have you ever experienced betrayal like this from someone you trusted completely? Have you ever realized that a relationship you thought was built on love was actually built on convenience? Share your story in the comments below. Sometimes the first step to healing is realizing you're not alone. And remember, you are worth more than what you can provide. You deserve love that doesn't come with a price tag. And you have the strength to walk away from anyone who can't see that, even if they're family. Especially if they're family. I never expected to be standing in front of my mirror, smoothing down a navy blue dress, preparing to attend Jake's wedding. But here I was 18 months after that devastating Thanksgiving, getting ready to face my family again. The past year had been a journey I never could have imagined. After our tentative text exchange, Jake and I had started meeting for coffee once a month. At first, it was awkward, two people trying to rebuild a relationship that had been built on lies and manipulation. But slowly, carefully, we'd found our way to something real. Jake had changed. The entitled boy who'd casually mentioned knowing about the financial abuse was gone, replaced by a man who'd spent months in therapy working through his own issues with Dad's manipulation. He'd gotten a steady job at a marketing firm, partly inspired by my career path, he'd admitted sheepishly, and was paying his own way for the first time in his life. I didn't realize how much Dad controlled all of us, he told me during one of our coffee meetings. He made me dependent on him, just like he made you useful to him. Different methods, same result, he got what he wanted from both of us. The woman he was marrying, Jessica, was nothing like what I'd expected. She was a nurse, practical and kind, with no patience for manipulation or game playing. When Jake had told her the whole story about what happened to me, she'd insisted on meeting me herself. I needed to know that Jake was serious about changing, she'd explained when we met for lunch. If he could brush off what happened to you, he wasn't the man I thought he was. But he's done the work, Sarah. He's really done the work. Emma had reached out too, about 6 months after everything fell apart. Her letter was heartbreaking, pages of apology and explanation about how she'd known something was wrong but hadn't known how to speak up. She'd been living with guilt for years, watching Dad use me while benefiting from it herself. I was a coward, she'd written. I should have said something, should have warned you, should have stood up for you. I let you pay for my wedding while knowing it was wrong, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. We'd rebuilt our relationship slowly too. Emma had moved across the country after her divorce, a marriage that had failed partly because of the guilt and dysfunction she'd brought into it. She was in California now, working as a teacher and in therapy, trying to break the cycles of manipulation she'd learned growing up. She couldn't make it to Jake's wedding, the expense was too much on a teacher's salary, but she'd send a gift and a card that made me cry. To Jake and Jessica, it read, "May your marriage be built on the honesty and respect that our family is finally learning." And to Sarah, who taught us all what real strength looks like. But it wasn't just my siblings who had changed. Linda had surprised me the most. After her divorce from Dad was finalized, she'd moved into a small apartment downtown and gotten a job at a nonprofit helping women escape financial abuse. She'd sent me a card on the 1-year anniversary of that terrible Thanksgiving. "Dear Sarah," it read, "I know I can never undo the harm I allowed to happen, but I want you to know that your courage saved more than just yourself. I'm working with women every day who are going through what you went through, and I tell them all the same thing: they deserve better, and they have the strength to demand it. Thank you for showing me what that looks like." She'd asked if she could come to Jake's wedding. "I know I don't have the right to ask," she'd said when she called me. "But he's still my son, and you're the reason I learned how to be a better person. I'd like to be there for both of you, if you're comfortable with it." I'd said yes. Forgiveness, I'd learned in therapy, wasn't about forgetting or condoning what someone had done. It was about freeing yourself from carrying the weight of their actions. Linda had done the work to change, and Jake deserved to have his mother at his wedding. But Dad was a different story. He'd completed the court-mandated counseling, but he'd never really taken responsibility for what he'd done. His letters to Jake and Emma had been filled with justifications and excuses. I was trying to teach Sarah independence. I thought she understood the arrangement. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. Even after everything, he couldn't see that what he'd done was wrong. He could only see it as a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. Jake had struggled with whether to invite him to the wedding. "He's my father," he'd said during one of our coffee meetings. "But he's also the reason you almost lost everything." I don't know how to reconcile those two things. In the end, it was Jessica who made the decision. "This is our wedding," she'd told Jake firmly. "We're not starting our marriage by enabling people who refuse to change. He can be in your life if and when he proves he's different, but not at our wedding." So as I walked into the small church where Jake and Jessica were getting married, I knew I was entering a space free from the manipulation and toxicity that had defined my family for so long. It was just the people who had done the work to heal, who had chosen honesty over convenience, love over control. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. Jake, standing at the altar in a simple black suit he'd bought with his own money, looked happier and more at peace than I'd ever seen him. When Jessica walked down the aisle in her grandmother's wedding dress, not the expensive gown Dad would have insisted on buying, her face was radiant with genuine joy. As they exchanged vows they'd written themselves, I found myself crying for reasons I hadn't expected. Not from sadness or grief, but from hope. These vows were everything our family relationships had never been: honest, mutual, based on respect rather than dependence. "I promise to build a life with you that's based on truth," Jake said, looking directly at Jessica. "I promise never to use you, never to take advantage of your love, never to make you responsible for my happiness while taking yours for granted." Jessica's vows were equally powerful. "I promise to love you not for what you can provide, but for who you are. I promise to build wealth with you, not at your expense. I promise to be your partner, not your caretaker or your dependent. During the reception, a simple affair at the church hall, Linda pulled me aside. She looked older than her years, but there was a peace in her eyes that I'd never seen before. "Sarah, I want you to know something," she said quietly. "Watching you walk away from us, seeing you choose your own dignity over our comfort, it changed my life. I stayed in that marriage for 15 years after I knew it was wrong because I was afraid of being alone, afraid of starting over. You showed me that starting over was better than staying broken." She paused, looking across the room at Jake and Jessica dancing to their first song as a married couple. "He's a good man now," she continued. "Better than his father ever was. And that's partly because of you. Because you refused to accept less than you deserved, and it forced all of us to look at ourselves honestly." Later that evening, as the reception was winding down, Jake found me sitting outside on the church steps, looking up at the stars. "Thank you," he said simply, settling down beside me. "For what?" "For coming. For giving me a chance to prove I've changed. For showing me what real family looks like." He was quiet for a moment. "And for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." I looked at my little brother, not so little anymore at 27, but still the kid I'd watched grow up, the one I'd helped support without knowing it, the one who'd been as trapped in Dad's web of manipulation as I had been. "You know what I realized?" I said. "We were both his victims. He used me financially, but he used you too. He made you dependent, kept you from learning how to stand on your own feet, turned you into someone you weren't. We both lost years of our lives to his need for control." Jake nodded. "But we found our way out. Both of us." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how different this family gathering had been from that catastrophic Thanksgiving 18 months earlier. Instead of undercurrents of resentment and manipulation, there had been genuine love and celebration. Instead of people using each other, there had been people supporting each other freely, without obligation or expectation. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma in California. "How was the wedding? I've been thinking about you all day." I pulled over to respond, "Beautiful. Honest. Everything a family celebration should be. I wish you could have been there." Her response came quickly. "I was there in spirit." "And Sarah? I'm proud to be your sister. The real kind of sister, not the kind who takes advantage of you." 6 months later, I got another surprise. Emma called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice bright with excitement. "Sarah, I have news. I'm getting married too." My heart jumped with joy for her. "Emma, that's wonderful. Tell me everything." "His name is David, he's a teacher too, and Sarah." I told him everything. About Dad, about the financial abuse, about how I was complicit in it. I was terrified he'd run, but he just held me while I cried and said he was proud of me for facing the truth. She paused, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "And I want you to be my maid of honor. Not because you have to, not because of family obligation, but because you're the strongest person I know, and I want you standing beside me when I promise to build a marriage based on everything you taught us about honesty and respect." As I hung up the phone that night, I realized something profound. I hadn't just survived my family's betrayal. I'd transformed it. By refusing to accept abuse, by demanding better, by walking away when necessary and returning when appropriate, I'd helped create the family I'd always wanted. Not the family defined by blood and obligation and financial convenience, but a family defined by choice and love and mutual respect. And for the first time in my 33 years, I truly belonged. The guest house where this all started is still rented out to strangers. Dad still lives in the main house, smaller now without Linda's income, lonelier without the family he pushed away. Sometimes I feel sad for him, not guilty, just sad for a man who chose control over connection and ended up with neither. But mostly, I feel grateful. Grateful for the strength I found in my darkest moment. Grateful for the family members who chose to grow instead of staying broken. And grateful for the life I've built, not just financially independent, but emotionally free. Because here's what I know now that I didn't know at 32, family isn't about who you're related to. It's about who shows up for you, who tells you the truth even when it's hard, who loves you without keeping score. And by that definition, I have the most beautiful family in the world.